All right, we're at 12:01. First of all, hey, thanks everybody for joining us in our part two of our six-part series around digital manufacturing. If you missed part one, please take a look at the meeting invite that you looked at here. It'll give you a link to the first one. Where we kind of started unpacking what is digital manufacturing and digital transformation. And this being part two is we're going to start talking a little bit about the how today. So I'm Jim Mansfield. I'm proud to lead the Manufacturing Intelligence Division for Matrix Technologies. And I'm joined today by Jeff Panning and John Lee. They'll be doing a lot of the heavy lifting here, and I'll get them to introduce themselves and a little bit about their roles here in just a minute. I'd like to start out just with a very quick rundown on Matrix Technologies. So we are just over 40 years old this year, actually heading on 42, established back in 1980. Roughly 320 or so employees today and growing like a weed. Should be in that 75 million revenue range this year, and projects completed across 45 different countries. Our success has really been around relationships, and from those relationships have developed an enormous following of clients that have, quite frankly, just simply trust us. And therefore, over 85% of our projects today are additional engagements with satisfied clients. Go ahead, Jeff. As far as what we do, or for who do we do work, it's the oil and gas industry, chemical, food and beverage, CPG, pharma, aggregate, wine and spirits, and metals. Those are our core focus. We will reach outside of those areas if it's strategic in nature for our clients, and somebody really needs our specific expertise. So go ahead, Jeff. So as far as what do we do within those industries, we are a full service resource for literally any automation or engineering project. Find a discipline out there, and chances are we have them internally of Matrix Technologies. So from, I'm going to go right to left here, from the EPC or engineering, procure, and construct in managing large projects, whether it's an entire line coming in, or whether it is a brand new building, down to the process, facility, and machine design and engineering. And then our industrial automation systems literally from the shop floor all the way up through the PLC, PAC, DCS SCADA layer and into the manufacturing intelligence arena. So at this point, that's it. That's all I really want to cover on Matrix. So I'm going to turn this over to Jeff Panning and John Lee. Gentlemen, take it away.
Thanks, Jim. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Panning. I'm a senior project manager with Matrix. I've been at Matrix for about 3 years, but have had a background previous to that in numerous companies, and mainly in information technology, project management, IT management, and that sort of thing. So, John?
Yeah. Thanks, Jeff, and good afternoon. My name is John Lee. I'm a department manager with Manufacturing Intelligence Solutions, doing the implementation work. I've been with Matrix about 15 years, have about 3 decades doing data and analytics in various industries.
Okay, perfect. So today, as Jim mentioned, we're going to talk about how we execute in digital manufacturing projects. So we're going to take you through basically how we execute projects and kind of share with some of the behind the scenes things of how we look at projects, how we select, how the projects will be run, and walk through the life cycle a little bit. So quick look at the agenda here. We're going to take a look at the team first of all. This is the Manufacturing Intelligence team at Matrix, and talk about our project life cycle. Then we're going to dig a little bit more into life cycle stages. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the execution spectrum. We operate basically on somewhere between a true Agile, 100% Agile, and 100% waterfall. So we're going to talk about kind of what that spectrum looks like. Then we'll talk a little bit about how we select the right approach for a project and make that decision. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the steps within the project execution and how we do execute. And we'll wrap up with some keys to success and some questions and answers. So just a reminder, if you do have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to just put them in chat. We'll be monitoring that, and we'll take the questions as we get them, and hopefully make this somewhat of an interactive process here, and so we're able to answer your questions as we go. Okay. So to start off, our team is called the Manufacturing Intelligence Team at Matrix. It's primarily made up of three types of folks. We got the consultants, implementers, and project management. And basically, we're going to talk a little bit more about each of these, but basically in more detail in the next slide. But basically, these folks are all involved with the projects, all the projects. And the types of projects we typically run are manufacturing operations management projects, like different processes within manufacturing, or manufacturing execution systems that really bring real-time data to life and visualize basically the operations. We also do some custom programming work. So that is another piece of the work as well. So John, anything else to add with this slide?
No, that's a good explanation, Jeff. For manufacturing intelligence, when we talk about smart manufacturing, this is really all about the data and the information, from the shop floor to the top floor, just moving the information around, integrating and connecting systems, providing, repositories for historical data, ad hoc querying, real-time access, and just to help architect those systems that are extensible and scalable, can scale out to, different areas within a facility or different plants altogether. This is where the manufacturing intelligence team typically works.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the project lifecycle now, in addition to the team roles. So as we look at our overall lifecycle, we have three stages. We have the customer problem definition or discovery, the customer solution development or design, and then the customer solution implementation or execution. And throughout that process, we have the folks on our team either play a major or minor role, but they are involved throughout the entire process. So up front, for the discovery and design phases, we've got the consultants are heavily involved with that. The project manager is really involved throughout the entire project. And then implementers are more involved on a minor level to get some awareness and understand what the project's going to be about. So when they take over as the major role in execution, they're already prepared for that. It's not something brand new to them. At that stage in execution, the consultants still remain involved, but they're taking more of a minor role in supporting as we go, typically in reviews and things like that, and along the way as needed.
Sure, and that's a good point, Jeff. I will add a couple things. As we decide on an approach for any project, one key thing is setting those expectations up front. And typically, we do have like a RACI chart and record some of these different roles on both the integrator for the matrix side as well as for the client side. Within our team roles, as Jeff has listed here, we have our consultants, and those really there's two typical types. We have the solutions architects, which help with the right solution, given what the enterprise, the environment, and the process is like. We also have very specific system architects, which are subject matter experts in certain technology or verticals that we have available for the project teams. The implementers, they could be crossover or cross-functional in some cases, but typically on the larger projects, we have many different roles and many different team members. So this just kind of helps lay out where their involvement is, as Jeff mentioned, throughout the life cycle as we go through the process.
All right, thanks, John. And also, I wanted to mention that our process that we follow within the project is ISO certified, and we're constantly working to improve that, and working through audits and things like that to make sure that we're operating at the highest level that we can. Okay, so we dig a little bit deeper into each of the stages of the project life cycle. Remember, what I said is discovery, design, and then execution. So in discovery phase is typically when the kickoff is. We're getting together, understanding what the problem is that we're trying to solve, the goals, looking at basically where we are now, where we're going, and then what the gap is, and that becomes typically the scope of the project. We're brainstorming solutions, coming up with as many possible solutions as possible, looking at basically the groups of people we're working for and building personas for those folks so we better understand what we're developing for them and why that's important. And then basically coming out of that first, the problem definition stage is we're picking the top solutions that we've come up with to take to the next stage. So once we get to the solution development stage, we're really working through vetting those solutions, really looking at them from a desirability, viability, and feasibility standpoint to really determine which are the best fit for that client. We're using things like mock-ups and rough prototypes to do that. So basically, we're actually giving the client pictures of what things will look like, what the data flow looks like, what navigation through the screens, even though it may be rough, what that looks like. Because we realize that basically, someone doesn't really know what they want until they see what they don't want often. So in other words, if you're providing a mock-up to someone, they're able to go through and say, yep, that makes sense, or hey, where's this, or hey, I need some additional information here, or today's process requires X and we don't see X here. So we are able to realize that up front before we start development and get a pretty good idea of what solution is going to work best for that client. We would then select that solution, complete some high-level designs, perhaps do a product roadmap, and also then develop out a backlog of basically what it looks like for execution and what we're going to execute in what order. One thing I wanted to mention also is I skipped over previously when I talked about the problem definition stage up front. The last webinar was about the matrix transformation assessment. That's typically when the assessment would happen as well, because that kind of falls into the activities in that column there. All right, so then coming out of solution development, like I said, we have a solution picked. We have a high-level designs, roadmap, high-level backlog to execute. And so then basically we're going to look at the project approach. Which approach makes sense to execute for that project? And we typically come up with some sort of a hybrid approach. And I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. Then is execution. And we're going to execute using the approach that we've selected and then deploy and validate. So, really wrapping it up, deploying it, validating, make sure it's going to work properly for the clients.
So Jeff, you mentioned the transformational assessment, right? As we look at some of the activities in the problem definition on that left side column. So could you just expand on that for those who may not have seen, I guess, the first video in the series? Is that sort of like a workshop, or how is that facilitated?
Yeah, typically what we do is we go in and meet with the client, meet with some of the key stakeholders at the client that really cover all the various areas of the business, and really just go in and understand what the problem is that they're trying to solve. Look and see if they have a digital strategy in place that we could, leverage to move them forward and try to make improvements at their site. Oftentimes it's things like, hey, we want to get rid of all the paperwork on the floor and convert that from clipboards to mobile phones or better access to our data or things like that. So basically we will be looking at working with those stakeholders, likely in some sort of a workshop fashion, facilitating those sessions, going through really gathering the data, gathering again where they are now, where they're going, what the gaps are, and then building out that roadmap of where we go. So basically we have a plan moving forward with them that they're able to execute a series of projects to get there. So John, I don't know if anything else to add with that.
Sure. So as mentioned in the first video, the matrix transformational assessment will also actually provide with a digital readiness score for how ready you are for digital transformation, as well as providing all the outcomes of what's listed there in column 1. It'll be well organized. It'll be reviewed. I think one of the key things, Jeff, you mentioned, having a workshop, and, everybody likes workshops, but sometimes they're not quite as productive always. So I think it's worth mentioning, that we do have trained facilitators, right, that help conduct these. They are used to working to get some of the answers and dig deeper where needed and try to get some information out. There are different dimensions, different groups across the organization, including like operations, leadership, maintenance and engineering, quality, and it's across 10 pillars. So it's quite in depth. It gets to a lot of detail to help identify some of those challenges, some of the business requirements, as well as, like Jeff mentioned in the workshop, it's really about getting together and doing a little brainstorming too, and understanding what the roadmap needs to look like and help formulate that strategy that can be agreed upon.
Okay,
I think that's it, Jeff, unless you want to talk a little bit more about solution development, because I think we're going to get into the approach a little bit later, right? I guess the only thing to point out, when we talk about mock-ups and rough prototypes, we do this in a couple different manners. I think Jeff had mentioned, we could whiteboard things. We have different applications where we can do wireframes, and it really depends on the solution. If it is something that we're looking at as commercial, we may actually look at the application and bring something up and really walk through that during that solution when we're trying to vet it out and really go back and forth and help work through that selection for the right solution. And our architects, consultants, they're very good at working through that with the client, showing, displaying, maybe even prototyping something, just so we could have better talking points. So there's quite a bit of detail involved with that step as well.
Yeah, we really find that as a key step also, because like I said, that earlier we can visualize that with the client to show them what we're going to be providing, the flow, the data, things like that. The more we're able to uncover, requirements that we haven't talked about before. And so the earlier you uncover requirements before execution, the better. So we found that to be a very handy way to do that.
Okay, very good.
All right, so let's talk about the spectrum a little bit. So basically, I mentioned before, if you look at a spectrum where Agile, 100% Agile is on one end and 100% waterfall is on the other end. And when I say waterfall, it's sometimes called traditional, but it's basically where you're planning things out in kind of a linear fashion. You're doing most of your planning up front because you already know basically what you're going to do. Maybe you've done this before. It's like building a house, right? You know the steps, you know what it takes, and basically you're doing the planning up front, and then you're following that plan throughout the entire process. We're more on the Agile side of things. We find this in software development a lot, where basically you're developing something that may not have been done before. So there's a lot more uncertainty around that. And so basically what you do is you tackle one area that, first of all, where there's uncertainty, develop that out, come up with a plan of how that's going to execute that, and then reevaluate. Okay, what's our long-term goal that we're going toward? Are we still going toward the same long-term goal? Has our path changed at all? Do we need to pivot anywhere? And things like that. And then basically you're able to make those changes as necessary. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about them in the future slides here, but basically you're able to go through and make quick adjustments as needed to really minimize that rework.
So Jeff, one thing people look at too is risk, right? So knowns and unknowns. So could you describe which side those fall on real quick?
Sure. So when you're looking at an Agile project with software development, for example, there's a lot of uncertainties and risks. Like I said, that you just don't know all the solutions. You don't know all the steps you're going to have to take. You don't know exactly what things are going to look like or what kind of issues you're going to come across. So doing it incrementally in an Agile fashion really reduces those, because you can evaluate what your risks are up front and really tackle those areas with the biggest risks up front, and then get beyond those and go beyond and keep on moving down the project line.
Okay. I would note too, there's a difference there between the disciplined approach, which would be the waterfall towards the left, and the more agile or fluid, adaptable approaches. Some of those also go around, how you can specify the system. So when you come up with functional specs and you have to spend a lot of time writing that up front, as Jeff mentioned, that's more the traditional and the waterfall approach. Agile is more around writing use cases, right? So it's scenario based. And a lot of the use cases still have to be broken down to more granular use cases. And the concept is to also have a test-driven approach, right? So instead of coming up with large test plans and the waterfall and maybe some large simulation that would be required, Agile allows more of that test-driven upfront approach for each individual use case as you iterate through development. So there are some differences in the delivery there as well.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about how we select the right approach for the project. And the approach really depends on the project, client, and team. Some examples. So basically, for a waterfall traditional approach, you can think of this as kind of taking something off a shelf, taking a project off the shelf that you did before, dusting off a little bit, adjusting it to fit the new situation, new client, new purpose, and reusing it. Right, so the project scope and outcomes are highly repeatable. So therefore, the planning could be done pretty much up front. You follow the plan throughout the project. It may be a case where the client prefers to use what I call the Nike approach, or just do it. Let's agree it up front. What we're going to do. You do it. Come back to me when you're done, and then we'll test it, implement it, and deploy it, and get it done. And this is especially the case sometimes when you're doing repeat business, if you're going site to site to site, or maybe line to line to line in a plan or something like that, where you're repeating, adjusting slightly, and repeating again. It's also where the team has worked on the previous project, so the team is very familiar with what's going on, the client, the project, the need, and things like that. They're able to re-execute very quickly without a lot of planning along the way. And like I mentioned before, it's typically projects where there's lower risks, meaning uncertainty, because it has been done before. So with the Agile approach, look at this as more. Oh, go ahead, John.
No, Jeff, I was just going to throw in a couple more things there before we get into the Agile. The traditional approach works well in manufacturing also when you have known systems, right? As Jeff mentioned, the low risk. So when you have like OEMs that have the known system and a lot of the specifications for how it needs to come together and work as a system, or you have like P&IDs and the drawings and everything, and like you're looking at automation and HMI screens, those kind of things are kind of already known, and it's kind of well defined up front. And those do make for more of that traditional Agile approach. It's not that you can't iteratively develop it, but the approach overall is more traditional. Go ahead, Jeff. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. You're fine.
Let's get into more of the Agile.
Yes. Yeah. So I compare Agile, the approach, to more of like navigating whitewater landing or whitewater rapids. Okay, so I worked at Cedar Point in the summertime during college, whitewater landing. So if you're navigating whitewater rapids, you're basically planning as you go, because you don't know what's around the next turn. You're going to get up there and maybe the water is low, and maybe there's a rock that you haven't seen there before, which changes the course of the river. So it's really a matter of kind of planning as you go, being adjustable, being flexible, and things like that. So from a project standpoint, the project scope and outcomes are a lot of times new. You have not done this before, so you cannot reuse the planning like you did in waterfall. And so you really have to use more of an incremental approach to allow learning along the way and adjustments. A lot of times the client wants to be engaged throughout the project and really needs to be engaged throughout the project to give that necessary feedback to the project team on what's needed and how it needs to look, and making key decisions along the way. And then the team is oftentimes new to the client or the solution also, or they haven't done this before. So it becomes even more important once again to kind of get that engagement, plan as you go, and work through things and be flexible. And because of all this, it's typically, like I said, highly uncertain, a lot more uncertainty and risk than other types of projects. So that's why you do it in increments, small increments prove it out, learn from it, move forward and take on the next increment and continue on like that. So I like to think of it this way: is it off the shelf that you can reuse something that you did before, or are you navigating new waters that you really need some way to be more flexible?
Right, and that's a good point, Jeff. And so those turnkey where the client can't be involved, they just want the delivery. Like you said, a lot of that planning is a must up front, and it has to get through it, and it has to get well understood, well documented. But the Agile for the uncertain things, when you're in those unknown waters, as Jeff likes to put it, those allow you to make changes constantly, like change direction a little bit here or a little bit there. And in software development, there's a lot to the iterative life cycles that software goes through as it builds on. And the key is to allow for extensibility, right? To extend out the project, to keep adding features to it as you go through and as you iterate. So it's like any other software, like Microsoft Office, it goes through multiple revisions where they keep maybe adding things, keep adding features or new technologies or new interfaces. This is kind of the same concept in the way that we work through and we deliver the software. Do you have any other analogies there, Jeff?
No, I don't believe so. I think I'm out of analogies.
Yeah. I really like the whitewater one. That's a really good one.
Okay, so if we look at the steps in the hybrid process, we're either typically executing projects in more of a waterfall fashion or more of an agile fashion. So, and really the steps that we take are the same either way. It's just how we do them. So in a waterfall fashion, shown on the left side of the screen here, we're really doing steps in more of a linear fashion. Now there may be some overlap like shown here, or there may not be a lot of overlap. It depends really on that specific project. But there is more linear, one after the other. On the right side, it's showing more of an iterative approach that we use in agile projects. And so, as you can see, the same steps, but basically within each iteration, sometimes called sprint, depending on the type of project that you're executing. But within each iteration or sprint, it's all the same steps. So quickly going through some of the steps, obviously there's some upfront planning that typically upfront would include the kickoff to the project. Kickoff to the execution stage of the project. And then there's some design that's going to take place to really make sure that we've got things all set. And a lot of this, if it's design on top of what we've done previously in the previous stage, it may just be minor design or be more detailed design that's coming up that still has to be done. Development and testing really go together. Our developers typically do development and do unit testing, and then pull together enough functionality for a integration test to make sure things flow properly throughout whatever functionality it is that we're providing. And then deploy and review would become next, where we're actually deploying that out to many times a client-side server, where it's going to be tested further, maybe a beta test, or maybe just the final production productivity and production implementation as well. And then there's the launch. So basically the cutover, go live, and post go live support. So as you see on the right side, it's all the same steps, but basically within each iteration, we're doing each of those. And so basically we would pick a portion of the scope, a certain level of functionality that we've defined in the backlog, and we would go through all these steps again to basically go all the way from planning for that out to launch. And then a lot of times we would push it out to a client side for beta testing to get additional feedback and let them actually use it to make sure that it's working the way they expected it. And then we'd go on to the next increment and do the same thing, same steps with that to develop the next step of the functionality. And then so forth, and through the number of iterations that we've defined as necessary for the scope of the overall project. So anything to add, John?
Yeah, I just wanted to note, I think, Jeff, you kind of touched on it a little bit. In the waterfall, when we get to that development phase, we do develop things in phases, right? So we will develop features. We may even have like mini FATs or reviews, but we also don't go back and do the entire stack again. And that's one of the key differences for what you see as the Agile process, more on the right there with the iterative approach, is we actually kind of split it off, and we'll go back in some of the major features. We actually will wait and do that planning. So even though we have the full product backlog in the beginning, we actually don't go through and do the full planning for each one of those until we're ready for that feature to be delivered in that specific iteration. And that's one of the keys of the client interaction with the Agile delivery and being part of the team, is they're going to have to spend a lot of time and be closely communicating, collaborating with the team as well. Whereas, as we mentioned in the turnkey, maybe on the waterfall to the left, the client's more involved up front, and then not so much until it gets to the later steps towards the end. So we kind of handle all that in the middle of it there. So Agile is really tightly coupled to collaborative development with the client, getting that constant interaction. One of the roles, Jeff, I think in Agile is the product owner, which represents all the stakeholders and helps make decisions within development. And those are decisions that you mentioned, need to be made, in a short amount of time. It's kind of hard to be stuck and waiting on a decision for weeks at a time. So in order to keep things moving, we do have to be collaborating constantly. And I think that's one of the big differences. I think another thing to mention with either of them, Jeff, is probably the change management, right? I was just going to, just kind of say that, the change management for any project really starts way up in the planning phase. And it is like, why are we doing the change? Who raised the concern or raised the change? You go through like what the reasons for the change are. You got to be able to disseminate that information, get it out to all the stakeholders, everyone who's affected. You want to be able to define the return and the benefits, as well as some risk. And you got to be highly communicative in getting that information out. And that really helps with the change management. And that's throughout the entire process. No matter if it's, disciplined in between as a hybrid approach, or it leans one way or another, change management is always a key for a successful project to go in.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, you mentioned the planning for the Agile methodology, going each iteration. A lot of that's based on the backlog that you're building. So you're building a product backlog with basically the highest priority items at the top, lowest priority at the bottom, and bringing the client in and keeping them engaged throughout each iteration, and especially during the planning, allows them to reprioritize at different points throughout the project. So maybe something that was top on the backlog previously, maybe something's changed, and maybe that's moved down a little bit, something else has moved up. And so basically they're able to make that swap. And then basically we're able to reevaluate what needs to be done on the next iteration. So it's not set up front, like we mentioned for the waterfall. It's really more flexible, that we can adjust the priorities as we go based on what the client is seeing. Because oftentimes someone will see something and it'll bring out new ideas about how to do things, or things where they can make improvements, and basically that may be added in the process a lot easier in the Agile than often it is in the waterfall.
Mm-hmm. Good point.
Okay, anything else in this slide, John?
I think we're good.
Okay, so some keys to success. I'm going to tackle the first few here, and I think John's going to wrap up the last ones. So really the first three kind of go together to me. It's all around, as you go through the process, and especially in Agile, you're able to do this, but also in waterfall, inspect and adapt. So basically at regular intervals throughout the project, you're inspecting your work, you're inspecting how your team works together, and you're adapting. We do regular retrospectives with the team throughout projects, where basically we're taking a step back occasionally and saying, okay, things like, how are we working together? Is there anything else we need to do? Where do we need to improve? Where are some of the things that are really working well that we need to carry forward as best practices? And then we adapt. We are flexible with our plans, and we try different things if something's not working. We'll brainstorm, come up with things to try, and then we'll experiment with it and see if it works better. And then we'll get back together next time, reevaluate how that's going, and adjust further. So that's really important. And then basically the retrospectives and then learning, because we're learning throughout the projects based on what we're doing. And like I said, what's working, what's not working, new ideas. So learning is really key. And then this all just drives continuous improvement to the team and processes. So like I mentioned, we've got ISO certified processes that we're constantly, tweaking based on learnings from projects to make sure that we've got the best process necessary or possible to follow throughout future projects.
Sure. And then I'll take the last couple, Jeff. I already kind of mentioned change management. This is a real key to success. It's getting the information out early. It is talking to people. It's, even bringing them in, letting them get some exposure. So representatives from all areas of the stakeholders, oftentimes, unfortunately, if we're doing it more traditional or waterfall, the operators may not get to see the screens until we get all the way to an FAT, right? And then they have a lot of feedback for that. And some of them still don't understand, why we're doing the change. So I think sharing all the information I mentioned before, as well as, things like just responsibility, that risk, and then the return, right? Understanding the benefits, the value to the organization. Some other things is also to understand how the change affects maybe other things that are in flux or currently changing. So the relationship of this change to other changes within the system or the organization, and how they play together and how they affect each other. So change management is a huge key to success. The other thing is, we talked about identifying, some of the problem definition and business requirements up front. I think some agreement on how you're going to measure success, whether or not you're meeting those goals and meeting the business requirements. A lot of the intelligence software deals with data or analytics or information. So there are ways to measure those, statistically, and getting the metrics to show whether or not you're succeeding, whether it's to increase OEE by 5%, or it's to provide visibility to 80% of the process data to the right data consumers or the stakeholders. There are different ways to measure success for various types of projects. So the agreement upfront, that level set of expectations of what you're getting, whether or not it's successful, are really another key to a successful project, and to that successful delivery. The testing approach, we talked a little bit about some of the differences. There are many ways to test. We do a fair amount of prototyping here within Matrix, and where sometimes when the client can get online, can actually see the systems. So whether that's during a retrospective and review when we're doing it a little more agile, or any type of a review for a function, features, or just screens, allowing the customer or the operators, whoever the stakeholders are, to actually get on the screens themselves, actually use them a little bit, or walk through a use case themselves, instead of just being displayed it or being presented the screens in a PowerPoint, or just getting the walkthrough. It's a lot more helpful when they actually get to be hands-on and they can actually work through a development system. And those can help be a huge key to success. Sometimes they'll uncover things too that they'd like to see. And then we can add those into future iterations as we go through and we develop out the software. So this testing approach, while we do all the, use cases and features, and it's more test driven, and we're doing internal testing, we do still get together and we do the acceptance testing, both pre-delivery, and then we do the site acceptance test, which is post-delivery after installation. So there's a lot of elements to testing that helps ensure success, that the system or the project is ready to go and it's well vetted.
Yeah, I just wanted to reemphasize a couple things with change management that John mentioned. That it really does start at the beginning of the project. From the kickoff, basically, we're talking about what the scope is, what the changes are going to be, and who those are going to be changes for. So there's that awareness. And then as we go throughout the project, whether it's traditional or especially in Agile, at the end of each iteration, we're doing a review with the client and all the stakeholders so it can see what has been done, what functionality is out there and how it's working. And it's not the only time that we're working with them. We're working with them prior to that, but it's basically an opportunity to bring all the stakeholders in to kind of see where we're at. And then that's really the beginning of the training period. You know, a lot of times on projects, at least in the past, people wouldn't really see the changes that are being made or the functionality until training or implementation happens down the road. This really gets people's eyes on things earlier so they have that awareness of what's happening, what things are going to look like, and then that just builds throughout the project as we add functionality. So definitely a key to success, and it's something we try to even do on the traditional projects. Like John mentioned, the factory acceptance testing, we've doing more and more of those after certain pieces of development have been done and functionality is out there to see, to really start that process earlier versus later.
Right, and I would add too, Jeff, we talked about just the RACI charts that get included sometimes for responsible accountability. The information one in the RACI is often one that gets overlooked, right? So, just people that need to be informed. We've put in projects before where, maybe a secondary operation or downstream operation, even a quality at one point, they didn't feel that they were informed that changes were being made to the system. And while there wasn't a direct responsibility or accountability there, but we want to make sure that we communicate and we inform people that some changes are coming. And as Jeff mentioned, that really you got to get out there as early as you can and start getting the message across.
Yeah, it's really key. All right, I believe that wraps up the slides. I don't know if there are any questions out in the queue.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. If any of our participants, members would like to submit a question, please use your chat and we'll be taking a look there. We may have one coming in, Jeff. So while we're waiting, Jeff, one of the questions we talked about, having controls and automation because Matrix is a full service engineering firm. And then we have the manufacturing intelligence. When you deliver two different parts of a project, do they follow different approaches or different implementation styles?
I think the simple answer is it depends, right? It depends on kind of back to that approach. Is one of them more of a off the shelf that we could do some upfront planning and implement that way? Or is it something that we have to kind of figure out because it's tightly interacted with the operating system or the software that we're developing? So I think it kind of depends on that. That would be something that we'd have to look at up front in the approach phase. Okay.
Very good. I'm not seeing too many questions, Jeff. So one I'll ask you, we did use the word agile. We talked about some of the iterative methodologies that fall under agile principles. There are different types out there. Does it really matter too much what type? So whether it's a sprint, a scrum, Kanban, does it really matter a whole lot?
To me, no. It really depends on what the best fit is. And there are purists out there that think that you have to do agile 1, 2, 3. They're very prescriptive, and I'm not one of those necessarily. I think it's more of it's a set of tools. It's a toolbox that you can pull things out of. Some of the main benefits of agile to me are just the engagement, the collaboration, the flexibility, and things like that. And I think you have to really look and see what makes the most sense for your project and what your client's willing to work with. Is it just that, hey, just go do it? Or is it, hey, I really want to be involved with this and help guide and support and make decisions along the way? And it, like I said, it depends on the project itself, which of those may it be. But no, I think it's I think there's excellent tools out there and processes and things like that from various types of agile out there that you can leverage.
So direct follow-up question to that, can you change during the project?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. You're adjusting constantly. You have to reevaluate, if it makes sense to make a major change during the project. You have to look at kind of the risks of that, especially depending on where you're at the project, but any minors and tweaks and how you're operating, that's the whole idea behind inspect and adapt, especially as far as how the team works.
Okay. Not getting in too many questions just yet. Jeff, do you have any questions for me?
Around some of the new manufacturing intelligence types of projects that we're taking on, how do you see the execution changing as what it is today versus what it was 5 or 10 years ago?
Yeah, sure. Great question. So it has adopted a lot. So as we look to get more iterative and more agile, which I think, as Jeff pointed, is really employing some tools. I think it's going a lot better because we're able to be a little more agile. We can do things in iterations. We can handle changes, either changes to requirements or requests, a lot easier with this tight collaboration and having the client being kind of an embedded part of the team, right? And constant communication. So I think it's really evolved quite a bit. We have a lot more success, a lot more, I guess, quality in the products that we're delivering. So we get it right the first time. So first pass go. So I think it's changed quite a bit. In the old Agile or the old waterfall days where we had to do quite a bit of the documentation, we would even have to go through, maybe 3 rounds of revisions to a functional spec. And that could take up to a week to get a 100-page functional spec reviewed by the customer and get that back in order for us to make changes, send it back out for review. So it does add some time to the project. I think with some of the technology and tools, like we're using Teams today, really have accelerated some of that and made it a lot more efficient in the ability to go back and forth and collaborate more tightly. Definitely a lot of pluses there.
Yeah, you mentioned a 100-page functional spec, and the challenge with that then is that it's only as good as when it went out the door, right? As soon as you hit send, if something changes, it's out of date. So doing it more agile incrementally, you're able to keep up those changes and not get too far down the road before you have to make a lot of rework and a lot of changes to that. So it's a big difference.
Yeah, and I will tie it back, I guess, to some of the webinar part 1 in the series as we talked about the digital transformation and doing the transformational assessment, right? As mentioned then, having a digital strategy and launching your transformational journey, that is a long process. And while we look at technologies today and solutions today, we can build for what we know today, but we want to be able to accommodate and extend out for future capabilities, right? And this is reducing that technical debt that may get entered into the system by using technologies that are not extensible, they're not open, they're not lightweight. So this is part of the reason why we start with all that upfront, understanding the problem definition, making sure we have enough information about the requirements, the future, the as-is, the to-be, the gaps, making sure that it's extensible and that it's going to last and not introduce a lot of technical debt. That is really going to set the customer up for a high return, high value project and a lot of success when the project goes in. And it's going to be scalable, right? That's another thing that we mentioned before, I think, in the beginning.
Right, absolutely. Well, I guess if there's no more questions, maybe we should wrap it up.
Sure. I guess just last comment, Jim, you're still on. Did you have any final notes that you wanted to offer?
Not on this one. Just, I guess, first of all, thank you both. Great job in unpacking not only a little deeper on what it is, but the how behind it. For those still on the call, kind of looking forward to numbers 3 and 4 coming down the pipe here on the next part of the series, where we're going to start to unpack a little deeper, I4O systems and solutions and the architectures, how they unlock and enable data. We're going to begin to hit into manufacturing execution system and operations management functionalities, and how they're enabled through the technologies and solutions of the third and the fourth industrial revolution. We're going to bring it home with the last two on project controls and standards and the reduction of cost throughout the how it reduces cost throughout the digital transformation journey. And then we talked a little bit about change today, John. And the final one that I think we're going to do in this series is around change management, change adoption, change acceleration, and how do we truly help our clients make change sticky. So I just look forward to seeing everybody on these last four as they come forward. I don't have anything else.
Great sessions coming up. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jeff.
Yep. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone, for attending today.
Yeah,
Take care, everyone. Have a good day.